We talk a whole lot about grace when it comes to our own lives. God's unmerited favor, his undeserving love. But do we extend that same grace to others? Too often we give based on who we think is deserving. But Jesus wasn't like that. His love was reckless. It was unfair and freely given. In this session, we'll explore what it means to embody that same grace, to step beyond merit and into kingdom economics that mirrors the life of Christ.
I remember watching a TED Talk a while ago by this guy named Born Lomborg. And Born Lomborg is an economist who got a bunch of people together, another bunch of economists together, to be able to figure out how to prioritize in saving the world. And so he thought to himself, and just instead of using emotions, instead of using just intuition, he thought to himself, okay, let's just take a very objective approach in figuring out what are the priorities in the world. So maybe we should give vaccines to people. Maybe climate change is the major issue. Maybe homelessness. I don't know. He just cited all of these issues, and he got a bunch of economists, brought them together and says, okay, let's figure out how to figure out what is the way we can address this issue with a very efficient way. And so if you're an economist, what you usually do is you try to figure out how to do more with less, right? And so that's an important thing to do as we are thinking about ministry to those on the margins. When you think about charity, when you think about social justice, any of these things, I don't know about you, but for me personally, I kind of think like an economist a lot of the times. I try to think about what's most efficient to do. What's the way to not just do Band-Aid solutions to issues of homelessness. Don't just do a sandwich run. Don't just do a soup kitchen. I tended to think in my mind, no, I gotta do the big hitting stuff, like the systemic issues. Let's get to policies. Let's get to things that are going to make a big difference in the long term. So when I heard this TED Talk, I was all for it because it really connected with me as a person who likes to think kind of abstract in those matters. But then what I noticed also in it is that way of addressing poverty and issues tends to, I'm going to use a big word, objectify those people who you are serving. When I looked at that experiment that they were doing and they prioritized and they found, for example, that, actually the biggest bang for your buck, if you want to put money and the biggest amount of impact, they decided as economists, you can reach the most amount of people and help the most amount of people through vaccines, like just simple flu vaccines and giving them out a lot. And on the other side of it, they realized that something like climate change was a lot of money for very little impact that you can make in a short amount of time, right? So they did that kind of thing, and that was very controversial as they were putting that out. But I realized through that is that I like that because it makes me be able to see issues of poverty and things like that and see it from afar and make it an issue or a problem to be solved, rather than for me to situate myself amidst the issues. Because I want to see results. I want to see things come as a result of what I'm doing, right? And so I think about it in a very economist lens. I like to do they call it quid pro quo. It's a way of being able to get something in return for what you are doing. So if I'm gonna say I walk by someone who's homeless, I look at them and maybe I size them up and I say, is this person gonna be a good steward of my resources, right? And I make those judgments in my mind. Is this person gonna actually do a lot with this, or are they gonna spend it on alcohol or all these different things? And right away in my mind, I make these quick judgments, thinking whether it's a good investment of my time. And without realizing it, I find myself determining people whether they are worthy or unworthy of my service or of my love or of my generosity. And the thing that I find that I want to begin this time with is understanding that Christian approach, a biblical approach, a theological approach to justice and compassion ministry must be grounded in not quid pro quo, not cost-benefit analysis, not necessarily economics, even though those are very helpful things for us to engage with. But they should not be that's not what roots the way in which we do justice and compassion. What roots us is the gospel, right? What roots us is the story of a God who incarnates himself into this world and lives with us, is with us. Not many transactions you could hear of in the Bible for the first 30 years of Jesus' life. And then those 3 years of engagement with us, and he ultimately dying on the cross for us and resurrecting, not necessarily because we deserve it or because we've been a faithful people all along throughout history. No, he came and died for us despite our inadequacies. And it's that grace, that unmerited favor of Jesus that we receive that informs the way that we enact grace in the world. So I don't know about you, but for me, when I think about my Christian life, I usually think about my relationship with God. And I have a whole theology about God's grace to me. You know, I can sin over and over again and ask him for forgiveness, and I can feel the grace of God. And I hear in sermons all the time about grace applied to me in my vertical relationship with God, me and God, up. But then when it comes to my horizontal relationships with people around me, for some reason, I don't translate the grace of God to me in the same way I am with people. Just like right back to that situation with me and someone on the streets. Right away, I'm not thinking grace when I'm engaging with that person. No, I'm thinking to myself, no, let's live in a merit-based system between me and you. Merit-based as in like cost-benefit analysis. Merit as in like make sure you're going to be a good steward of the things that I give you. In this horizontal relationship with people, I live in a very like cutthroat, you better pay me back kind of way, right? But when it comes to my relationship with God, oh, grace all the more. I want that grace. Give it to me. It doesn't matter how many times I betray you. You're going to keep your reckless love just running after me. Jesus, you love me so much. That's the approach that God gives me. But when it comes to people, no, I'm cutthroat. I want to make sure you're a good steward of my resources, right? And so when it comes to charity or when it comes to justice and compassion, I want to start off with just understanding how does grace of God, how does that influence the way in which we do things? Because I would say right now in this world, there's more and more understanding of economics. There's more understanding of what I said, quid pro quo. There's more understanding of being a good steward, you could say, of your resources. And I think that's all very good to do. But there's something radical about our Christian theology that allows us to see people in the image of God, not necessarily see them only in their deficits, not only see them in the way in which they're going to not be a good steward of our resources. We have the ability, because God somehow looked upon us and said, even though I know you failed me so many times, I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to be generous with my resources and everything to you, knowing that you will likely still maybe spoil all those things that I have given you. And so it's important for us to see, when we look at the heart of it and the root foundation of the way in which we do things, we have to be cognizant of how much we determine people based on whether they are the worthy poor or the unworthy poor, right? And I know that sounds dramatic, but it's often what we do. It's often the way in which we look at the world. And I would say it's because we tend to look at issues of poverty as a problem to be solved rather than a mystery for us to behold. Okay? I'm going to say a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to behold. When I came to do ministry at the Young Street Mission, I was working with homeless youth in a drop-in center. We had like 4,000 or 5,000 youth coming through our doors every year. So we had a high traffic of people coming in, and many of the youth were coming from troubled backgrounds. And I'm like church to the bone. Okay, my dad, mom and dad are pastors. I called myself Bible boy growing up. That's how bad it was. No one called me it. I called myself it. So it's quite sad. But that's the kind of upbringing I had. And so when I came into a context of a drop-in center where people would be, being able to do drugs, and someone selling drugs, and someone in prostitution, and fights breaking out, and all these things happening around me. I was overwhelmed by it. But I came in with my hero, superiority kind of syndrome, for me to be able to come in thinking that I'm here to help you. I'm here to save you, right? I'm here to be able to pick you up from all the things that you're going through, and I'm going to listen to you. You're going to cry, and we're going to get to Jesus. You're going to find him. And that's my mentality when I came in, thinking that these homeless youth is just an issue to be solved. And then when I came from that balcony perspective, coming into that place, I soon came into the awakening that when you get into the mix of all the messiness of the lives of these youth, you realize how incapable you are to be able to solve this issue. This is no longer just problem solving that you do in your classes in school. This is no longer just deconstructing things like you would take apart like a car, or take apart some kind of object and then put it back together. It doesn't work like that. These are living organisms, people who have been through a great deal of harm and hardships and trauma. All of these things are complex and happening, and we have to figure out, how do we make sense of that? Am I here to just fix things, or am I here to, number one, for myself, be formed by my interactions with the people, be transformed by the way in which they engage me? And also, I can help, of course, in some ways, but it's so easy to objectify it. I read this quote one time by John Mackay. John Mackay, he writes this quote, and just to give context of the quote, he just imagines this picture of a family on a balcony looking down below at the streets below. All right? And it's a very abstract quote here, but stick with me here for a moment. He says that the balcony, thus conceived, is a classical standpoint, and so the symbol of the perfect spectator from whom life and the universe are permanent objects of study and contemplation. Here, just for a moment. So he says, from the balcony, you look down to the road, and everything that you see there, because you can't see people's faces, you can see that there's a market down below and people are having a good time there perhaps, but you don't know. You can just see it from afar, and they look like permanent objects of study and contemplation. That's like before I came to work with the Street Involved Youth. I looked at it as an issue to be solved. And he says, in contrast though, he describes from the balcony to the road. And he says, the road is the place where life is intensely lived, where thoughts has its birth in conflict and concern, where choices are made and decisions are carried out. It is a place of action, of pilgrimage, where concern is never absent from the wayfarer's heart. Now that's a loaded quote, but it's a perfect distinction between looking at the issues from afar, from the balcony, and being in the road. Now, when you read these descriptions, he says, it's where life is intensely lived. When I'm with the Street Involved Youth, when I was there, man, when you get into the heat of it, I remember the smell of wet socks. I remember the smell of weed all around every day. It's just potent wherever I would go, right? And it became part of my life. It became where I would come home smelling like weed to my children. That's just how it felt, and I was immensely immersed in that context. It says also, where thoughts has its birth in conflict and concern. Meaning the road is a place that you think about what issues to talk about, not because it's like a philosophical thought, like, oh, how can we discuss this in a debate? It's because, for example, someone went through hardship. Someone is actually literally being prostituted by this person. And I know the person who is pimping out this other individual. I know both of them, actually, in the context of there. So then it's so easy to talk about sex trafficking as an issue, but then when you're in it and you see the dynamics occurring, suddenly it animates your conversation by it birthing in the conflict and concern, not only for the person who's being prostituted, but also the person who's doing violence and oppressing. You're looking at both of them and saying, even if I find shelter here, this person is continually doing these negative things. And then you go to that person and you say, why is this person doing this? Like, what is their history that caused them to come to this place? How can I actually serve this person as well? And so suddenly it's not so black and white. You begin to look at these issues in a more nuanced way because the road, you can actually smell the sweat. You can actually be in the heat of the moment. And I believe those emotions that you experience on the road are part of your learning, is part of your formation. So if you learn on the balcony all the ways in which to engage issues of poverty from afar, without actually feeling the heat of the road, without feeling the sweat, without being able to smell the different things and touch and hug and feel, then I believe there's a dissonance between what you think and what you feel. And those feelings matter. So I believe that although it's good to do things like, the shoebox, the Samaritan purses thing, it's good. It gets you activated in those things. Or maybe you donate to a cause here and there. I believe it's part of our Christian mandate to not only do things from afar, from the balcony, and only fund things and support a ministry on the side. That's good to do. But until you realize the call of a Christian to actually be in the road, to incarnate yourself in those places, I think it's important for us to understand that. For me, I don't think actually my calling, whatever that means in our day to day, my personal calling was to be doing the work of urban ministry. Again, I'm not the person who goes on the streets and homeless people gravitate towards me. I don't have that appeal. You know what I mean? I don't give off that thing, right, to people. It's not something that is necessarily a part of whatever my calling is, but it is a part of my discipleship. I remember when I was in Boston doing church planting, and I was preaching and teaching and leading small group stuff. That's my approach that my ministry was engaged with. But through that process, I started bumping up against scriptures, just reading scriptures about Jesus engaging the demoniac, Jesus engaging the woman with the issue of blood, Jesus engaging people on the margins as a high volume of his occupation. That's what he was doing most of the time. Now, in my studies, my theological studies, I was theologizing all that, right? I'm like, okay, that's great. Jesus would engage with the Samaritan woman at the well, who's probably outcasted by her community. That's great. And I theologized it, all right? I made an abstract idea, and I thought to myself, that's a good thought that I should take in. And then I realized as I was doing more work in church planting in Boston, I realized that in order for me to really learn what Jesus is doing, I need to be in the contexts or in situations that manifested the conflict that would have occurred in Jesus' mind in those interactions, right? So if Jesus is engaged with a Samaritan woman at the well where people would have thought that was odd for him to do, maybe it's important for me not to just understand what Jesus did from afar and theologize it and understand it in a biblical sense, but maybe I need to situate myself in an uncomfortable place where other people might look at that situation and see it with suspect, and me feeling all the feelings of being self-conscious about that, and being able to have the courage and the fortitude to say, I don't care what other people think, I'm gonna be fully present with this person, or like that is what's forming me, and that is probably what allowing me to be more Christ-like. I'm more Christ-like in that moment because I'm not only learning him abstractly, but I'm embodying what it is to feel all the things, and then I have to obey God in the midst of that. Does that make sense? And I think we've separated the ministry of justice and compassion and outreach ministry from the life of our spiritual formation and our discipleship. In our churches, a lot of the times, we make it two different things. A lot of the times, I go to different churches that I've been a part of myself and I've done myself, where the outreach ministry is just done by a select hardcore crew who's willing to go out and do all these things. And we as a congregation look at them and says, oh, we are doing so much for this issue of poverty. We're doing great. We pat ourselves on the back. When it's really, we fund it perhaps, we support it, but it's not part of our actual lives, right? We don't interact on that level a lot of the times. And I think it's great that a select group happens, but not only is it's not beneficial for the people being served, but the rest of the church is not gaining the benefit of being in community with people of difference. Because I believe that my time, for example, at Evergreen in those 8 years working with street-involved youth was probably more for me than for them, for the people that I was serving. It formed me in such a great way. And what I want you to see through this time here is that when we think about engaging with issues of poverty, and when we see the importance of being immersed into people, we have to understand that there is a cost it will have on us, right? There's a cost to it. And it's not always going to produce all the results in the world. There's a person by the name of Henry Nouwen that I love to immerse myself in. He referred to the text in Scripture where it says, Jesus leaves the 99 for the one. And back to the whole economist conversation, he says, in his rational brain, leaving the 99 for the one is not a very good use of our resources, all right? Leaving the 99 for the one means I'm putting 99 in jeopardy just for the purpose of one. That's textbook 101, not smart to do from an economist lens, right? You're not making the most out of your time or your resources. You're wasting your time on the one and leaving the 99. And so what he says in reference to this, and this is a quote I'm reading for you, he says, to make sense of it, he says this: when everyone becomes my neighbor, it is worth wondering whether anybody can really become my proximus. That is the one who is most close to me. After so much stress on the necessity of a leader to prevent his or her own personal feelings and attitudes from interfering in the helping relationships, it seems necessary to reestablish the basic principle that no one can help anyone without becoming involved, without entering with his or her whole person into the painful situation, without taking the risk of becoming hurt, wounded, or even destroyed in the process. Who can save a child from a burning house without taking the risk of being hurt by the flames? Who can listen to a story of loneliness and despair without taking the risk of experiencing similar pains in his or her own heart and even losing his precious peace of mind? In short, who can take away suffering without entering it? We have forgotten that no God can save us except a suffering God, and that no man or woman can lead his people except the man who is crushed by its sins. I believe through that quote, we can see the beauty of us understanding that being a part of people's pain and being a part of what is occurring in people's lives, that is part of the solution. Just even hearing it, being in proximity with it, is part of the solution. Even if you do nothing but be with those who are suffering, that itself is a huge statement not only for your own formation, but for a better understanding. And I encourage us as the church to be able to understand what it means to engage in those moments. Because it's easy to just focus on the 99 and forget the one. And when you make everyone your neighbor, it says in that quote, it makes you wonder whether you have anyone who you can call your close, or someone who is a proximus. And I think as we close this time, it's important for us to realize that I'm not sure if you've experienced any of these things in your life. If you're listening to this yourself and you yourself have gone through times where you've experienced shame, waiting in line for a free meal, or you needing to ask for change, or if you've ever been woken up in the morning by a police on the streets, I never experienced that for myself in my life. And as Christians, we need to treat people with the dignity that we desire in our life, whether we deserved it or not. Why? Because we have been people who are recipients of the grace of God. And we are capacitated to love people in the way that we've been experienced. So when you have a world without unmerited grace from God, if you live in a way of a merit-based world, then yes, you're going to treat issues of poverty and charity in a very calculated way. But when you've experienced the extravagant love, unconditional love of God and the relentless grace of Christ, it should inform your horizontal practice with those around us. So let's take that thought as we end this session and be able to discuss further about what it is to be able to discern the way in which the grace of God informs our practice with those on the margins.